sometimes just to have fun, we'd come into a meeting and, because we don't come out and say like father sons, they would see the last names. And so sometimes just to kind of throw a curveball, I'd say, yeah, this is actually my son. We are tracking at having reached an audience of about 1.5 billion.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the stream, an unscripted, unedited, free-flowing conversation featuring guests who reject the status quo with a bias for action in the world of water and beyond. My name is Tom Freyberg. I'm an environmental journalist and content creator specializing in water.
And I'm Will Sarney, a water strategy consultant and investor doing my part to solve wicked water problems.
And we are back for season 6, and we're a big thanks to our sponsor, Raymond James, for the season, all focusing on the Colorado River Basin. And we are pleased to bring the entrepreneurial voice to the table, the voice from the founder of a private sector company leading the charge, and that is Aaron Tartakovsky, the co-founder and CEO of Epic Cleantec. Aaron, thanks for joining us, and good to see you. How are you?
I'm so happy to be here. As I've mentioned, I'm a longtime fan of the stream, so it's an honor to finally be the third box on this interview setup here.
Amazing. Well, yeah, no pressure, right, Will? I mean, he's seen the episodes, he's seen what's coming, so
yeah, no pressure at all, Aaron. In fact, you're the most important box on this episode, so we'll have a good time. Be a great conversation.
I'm excited.
So yeah, Aaron, lots and lots we want to chat to you about in the next 30 minutes. We want to talk all things leading a movement. We want to talk about beer. Unfortunately, I don't have one to hand. It's 4:00 on a Friday afternoon. I really should. So I have to maybe run out and grab one. But
that can be remedied, by the way. After this episode, I'll correct that.
Oh, if you can ship to the UK, brother, I'm all down for that. So, but yeah, I think. Whenever we have the sort of entrepreneurial speakers and guests, and we always like to sort of ask around that origin story, that genesis, that spark for the idea of where that really came from. And I'm a big fan of your work, and you're leading that movement over in the US. But I actually don't think I'm aware of that sort of genesis story. So I'm really interested to find out a bit more on that.
Sure. Yeah. Look, my entry into water was a bit topsy-turvy. I think if you look at my career trajectory, didn't make a lot of sense. When I was younger, I wanted to be a veterinarian. Then I wanted to work as a chef. So started training in that world. Then I started studying history and religious studies and basically was on track to become a rabbi. Then I veered off and worked in politics. I worked in federal politics, which actually factored very strongly into the work at Epic. And then I ended up doing this work. And the genesis of this company is that it was actually born out of work with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So my co-founders are part of something called the Reinvent the Toilet Challenge. So if you've ever seen those videos of Bill Gates drinking so-called poop water, and again, that's not my word, that's the press's word, and we'll come back to the press and water and how that all factors into what we do. But out of that work, we then I think my co-founders were very much focused on single toilet applications. So focused on the roughly, over 2.5 billion people worldwide who don't have access to clean water and reliable sanitation. So the goal was, can we do for water and wastewater what cell phones did for telecommunication, which is to say moving from a reliance on poles and wires to decentralized forms of telecommunication, like with cell phones. So can we do for water what they did? And so sort of from that initial work at a single toilet application, we then joined forces, myself, these two co-founders, and then my fourth co-founder, who also happens to be my father, Igor. So my father was originally trained in the Soviet aerospace program, fled the Soviet Union, came to this country, moved into the building sciences, and has been designing high performance buildings for 40 years. So we basically said, can we do what was sort of done at the Gates Foundation, a single toilet application, and scale it up to buildings. And, I can talk more about sort of those early days, but that was the genesis, going from, single family toilets to now scaling up the solution to buildings, or at the district scale, or even at the community scale.
Yeah, really interesting. I wasn't aware of the connection to the Gates Foundation. I remember doing an article on that some time ago with Bill Gates drinking the glass, and I love a corny headline. So we were I think the the tagline on that was opening the gates to water reuse. Couldn't help myself on that one, but yeah,
Oh,
really
Tom.
interesting how it. I know, terrible Will. I know that was before.
Hey, Aaron, you bring up sort of poor branding and poor messaging in this whole sector, which, I think is part of the problem. It's really about, getting people to understand what the issues are and framing it in a way that is not threatening and, frightening, if you will. Singapore has done a good job. They had a couple of lessons learned along the way, New Water and so on. But can you talk about that a little bit in terms of how you communicate what you're doing and, sort of taking out that very poor messaging around water reuse?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And frankly, it's one of the biggest things that we do. We often say that we're not just trying to introduce new technological innovations, we're trying to transform the conversation. I use myself as a case study. I'm your run-of-the-mill individual, grew up in San Francisco, done a lot of cool work in my life, but like the average person, I kind of existed in this flush and forget society that we live in. I never thought about what happens after we flush the toilet. When I turn on the tap, water just comes out. And again, everything I'm saying is from a very privileged perspective, because obviously there's people around the world for whom that's not their reality. But for me, certainly I would imagine for both of you, that is the reality that we live in. So when I entered into this water industry, I was just floored. You hear about these statistics about the state of our infrastructure, about water scarcity issues, all the things that we know and live and breathe and do every single day. But I think the vast majority of people, they see the headline and they never really go deeper. And I think it's a consequence of just really good engineering. And we've designed these centralized systems that function so well that a consequence is that the average person never really has to grapple with it unless or until something goes wrong. So I think I used to say I'm new to the water industry, but we're creeping up on 10 years. So I don't know if I can say I'm new anymore. But, I think we basically are now dealing with the ramifications of systems that had been working really, really well. But as we all know, the combination of urban population growth, of aging infrastructure, of climate change, all of these things that are basic compounding. And we're at this point now where, the status quo of how we've done things is no longer sustainable. So I think starting from that point of the average person just really doesn't understand how our water systems work is critical. And I think, for us as a company, our core customers are real estate owners and developers. Again, super sophisticated people. These are people who are building massive projects, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars or even billions of dollars in terms of total project cost. But they don't know the first thing about wastewater. They have been conditioned for their entire careers that we pull water into these buildings and then we send wastewater back out. So how we communicate these things is extremely important. And we have to operate at a level of, candidly speaking to, a middle schooler, like really breaking down these issues, moving away from a lot of the industry jargon that people don't understand, and just really bringing it down to sort of the basics. And frankly, we use a lot of analogies because those are helpful. We're trying to do for water what solar did for energy, moving away from big coal power plants to smaller distributed. People get that. They can comprehend that. So then starting to use that for this world like water, which is, again, sort of very unfamiliar to folks. So that's how we think about these issues.
Great. And Aaron, you were talking about your background, your journey being diverse and maybe not knitting together. But, hearing you talk about this, it strikes me that could have actually been an advantage in terms of coming into the sector and thinking about, the status quo and how to change that and bring in really everything you've done prior. Am I on track with that one? Is that something you feel in terms of as part of your origin story?
1000%. I think we often talk about how part of our secret sauce as a company in the water space is that all four of our co-founders come from outside of the water space.
That's great.
We have a nanobiotechnologist from Jerusalem. We have a plant scientist from the south of Israel. We have my father, as I said, a former Soviet rocket engineer, and then myself, a recovering political operative. I think, we have like all the quintessential startup stories of, going into these meetings, going to conferences and basically being laughed out of the room. We were not so welcome in the water industry. And, I remember for one, going into meetings with utilities and just using the wrong terminology, and they were correcting me during our early pitches. And, I still have those PowerPoints and it's pretty funny to see now. But, there were water conferences where we went in, part of the innovation showcase that all these conferences have. And I remember a utility manager from the Midwest coming up to me after we were in the elevator together. And I said, "Oh, did you see the pitch?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "What do you think?" He said, "You're the jerks trying to put us out of business." And I said, "Well, we don't actually see it that way." But I think, we have I can go on for hours telling you the amount of stories of people from all walks of life who told us that what we were doing would never work, that buildings would never do this, this would never be a thing. And I think we just had I was going to say the audacity, but more the naivete to just continue pushing forward because we really felt that there was a there. I think part of the early days of Epic was me going and just talking to anyone who would talk to me. I was talking to academics. I was talking to folks from utilities. I was going to farmers markets and asking these people, I said, "Hey, would you put, upcycled wastewater organics on your crops?" And just this kind of domino effect where we really started to realize that there was a there and that we had an opportunity not to sort of to counter that utility manager, not to replace centralized infrastructure, but to basically supplement the broader industry with decentralized and centralized working in tandem to create this sort of more comprehensive and resilient system. And so, I think our diverse background of the founding team was essential to us just kind of thinking a little bit differently than maybe how others did.
I think that's
Aaron, take this as a compliment. You're in the category of an unreasonable person, so in that you saw something and you pushed and you did not accept the status quo. And you might be putting people out of business along the way, but that's innovation and disruptive innovation. Sorry, Tom, I cut you off.
Yeah, no worries. I was just going to say, I think having that kind of kickback from the utility is probably quite motivational. And I think, when someone says, "We've never done it like that before," to any true entrepreneur and founder, well, that's actually spurs them on and think, well, why not? And that naivety can be as much as a curse as it can be a blessing. You think, well, let's rethink this entire way we've been treating wastewater decentrally for decades and decades. So kudos. I'm interested because you mentioned, I don't think we've ever had a four-way co-founder on the show, Will. We've had co-founders normally where you have two of you. So having four of you, and you mentioned the different skill sets, is really interesting. But how does that kind of dynamic work? Because we've talked about a bit about this on the show before, where the best relationship with co-founders is when you kind of get the what person, the why person. I think if you look at Apple with the two, Steve Jobs was the why person and Wozniak was the what person, right? And together they work really well. How does that kind of work with the four co-founders that you have there? Because it sounds like you actually really complement each other really well.
Yeah, look, I think early days, to use a water pun, we were drinking from a fire hose. This was just a radically new world for us. And so, every single day we were learning something new, learning about a new regulation and getting excited about it. And, I think it was just a really vastly different skill set. And we all kind of very quickly fell into what we do best. My father is an amazing engineer. He's designed probably 30% of the high rises in San Francisco. That's his bread and butter. When it comes to the marketing side, the communication side, that's just not his skill set. I, on the other hand, am a pathetic engineer. I could never do what he does or what our engineers do, and I've just accepted that. I think it just kind of fell in pretty naturally. Two of my co-founders are not sort of super actively involved anymore. They've kind of taken they're based in Israel. It's kind of complicated with the time difference and everything else. But certainly we get a lot of questions about the dynamics of a father and son founding team. Not everyone has. I'm very fortunate to have a great relationship with my father. Our family's close. I mean, all of us live within 8 minutes of each other. So there was at one point where my father and I were carpooling to work together every day.
Love it.
So it works well. And, obviously, like in the early days, there was things we had to work on, like kind of having to coach my father, who's a very loving, kind man, to not call me sweetie in front of other employees. Not appropriate. But after we worked out those kinks, we all worked together very well.
I can imagine after a great pitch, sort of having your father coming along and, forgetting how old you are and just patting you on the head and going, "Good job, son. Good job, sweetie." Like, Dad, come on. Like, things have moved on now. Forget it.
Well, so sometimes just to have fun, we'd come into a meeting and, because we don't come out and say like father sons, they would see the last names. And so sometimes just to kind of throw a curveball, I'd say, "Yeah, this is actually my son." And then people are like, "What?" They get
should we have had your father and you on this episode? That would have been fascinating.
It's not where he enjoys himself most, but we have done one interview before. Specifically, there was a journalist really interested in his background just because she was from the former Soviet Union too. He left the Soviet Union due to persecution. He came to this country at the age of 24 with under $100 in his pocket. He had a suitcase with some underwear and a teacup and a bright blue suit and blue jeans. The first thing he did when he left the Soviet Union, he stopped in Italy and they bought blue jeans. They didn't have blue jeans in the Soviet Union. And, he just came here with nothing. And so I think we've done those interviews kind of talking about that story, but maybe for a subsequent conversation, we can bring Igor in.
You're coming back with your father.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. Yeah. I mean, I think also sort of testament to your father's kind of, the rise from and that migration, and also that probably instills into you, right? And that's that sense of work ethic and building something, and for sure. So, we're going to bring on, this is where I mispronounce your name, but son and father of the co-founders of Epic Cleantec for the next episode for sure. But so talk us a bit through, because you mentioned perhaps the marketing side of things and communication is one of your strengths. And it's pretty hard these days to go on social media if you're in water on Twitter or LinkedIn or anything and see and not see another sort of major US outlet cover your Epic reused beer, right? It seems to, I hate to use the word viral because I think it's probably overused and misused these days, but that kind of campaign and development truly got seen by millions, hasn't it? So can you talk us through kind of really the idea behind that, brewing the beer using the recycled water from the buildings, and also perhaps how successful that was?
Yeah, so just one statistic that's interesting. Right now, we are tracking at having reached an audience of about 1.5 billion.
1.5 billion. Okay, so a couple of million was a little short then.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it really gained a life of its own, and I think the history of it was, going back to when I entered into the water industry. One of the ways I learned was reading books. Going to every water conference that I could, which I've scaled back because the water industries are very good at having conferences, and just talking to people. And I was at one conference and there was folks from up here in the Pacific Northwest who were talking about this recycled water beer. This at the time was new to me, this pure water brewing alliance, Travis Loop and different folks involved with it. I remember thinking like, that is so cool. Like one day I would love to make our own beer. And so what happened was we decided last year in the lead up to the Green Build conference, which is the largest green building conference in the world, takes place in November in San Francisco, that, let's have some fun. Let's unveil a beer at the conference. And that was going to coincide with the launch of our new system, the Epic One Water system, which was the newest iteration of our technology. And so, we set to work. I mean, there's no playbook for how to do a recycled water beer from purified building Greywater. But we knew the technology worked great. The water quality was exceptionally high. So we had to find a willing brewing partner. And I remember years ago reading about someone who had partnered with NASA to make beer. So I got in touch with that brewery. They connected me to this one. Then finally we got to folks who were excited to work on this with us. And we had the plan in place. And so, it was a fun challenge because, when you're transporting water from a building to a brewery, it's one thing if you can pull up on the street and just, get that water, but we're on the -2 level of the basement, very small parking structure. So we had to fill up 275 gallon totes, 10 of them to be exact. And we kind of spaced out how long is it going to take to fill up these totes. So me and the team got to the job site at 3 a.m., started filling up, finished at 9:45 a.m. The trucks came at 10 a.m. We transported to the brewery. The water tested perfectly. They actually asked us to remove some of the salts. So we just added on another filter to bring that sodium level down. And then the brewers really did their magic. And what was funny was that we initially didn't really promote the beer because I think we were concerned of how is it going to be received. And the day we unveiled our system, the system was named one of Time's best inventions of the year. So we were kind of like, all right, let's focus. There's some good press coverage there. We're going to sit on this beer thing. And then a few months passed and I said, you know what? People are really enjoying the beer. All these tastings that we're doing, the chief sustainability officer of San Francisco had some. And so we basically started a proactive campaign to really get the story out there. And it just took on a life of its own, really. But it was a very fun experiment because on sort of the water communication side of things, all I heard when I entered the industry was people are not ready for recycled water. The public is not ready for it. I read all the different studies about the importance of language of if you call it treated water versus purified, that just makes a huge difference in terms of how people respond to it. So what I found was that, and this is true with the beer and it's true with all of our projects, we vastly underestimate the public's readiness for recycled water. I've heard it so many times from owners and developers, people are going to be, there's the yuck factor. They're not going to be ready for this. Every single active project we've had proves that wrong. And the beer, more than anything, just showed us that people are a lot more receptive than I think we as an industry give them credit for.
100%. Yeah, we did some work with KWR and Cranfield, and they did a sort of questionnaire and survey on perception on recycled water. And there's this great phrase that came out of it, and that's there's a perception about the perception. And actually people will embrace recycling and water reuse more than we give them credit for. And there seems to be this legacy of this perception where we have this assumption, the public perception against particularly direct potable reuse will, throttle the project and delay it. Well, that's come from some older sort of legacy projects, but actually today, where people are much more sort of environmentally aware, that they're more welcoming of water recycling projects than we give them credit for. So yeah, but just to comment, I think what you guys did on that beer campaign was genius, right? Because beer is the great social unifier of our time, and it got people talking about it, which is the first step.
Aaron, your public sector background and that I don't know, that view of the world, if you will, how does that tie into what you're doing from a technology perspective and changing behavior and so on? And I think you and I have touched on this in terms of regulations in the US are not helpful, and that's being kind. So how do you, as a entrepreneur, influence public policy at the state level, federal level, and communities?
What's interesting is when I entered the water industry coming from a political background, and I think I worked in politics, but I also come from a political activist family. So I've been steeped in this since I was a little kid. The first time I ever lobbied on Capitol Hill. I was 15, and I was assigned the role of delivering our message to then Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and I believe I pretty much almost fainted. That was the first time. the nerves got to me. But I've been around politics my whole life, and what I kind of tell people and tell my team is that, I think people oftentimes see politics as this distant, abstract thing that, what can I do to affect change? And what I tell them is that, members of this is true at the local, state, federal level. But let's take any elected official. They're being approached on any given day on 10,000 different issues, everything from big issues like the economy and water and borders to, I want this stop sign removed, or this speed bump on my street is a pain in the ass. And so they're constantly being inundated with asks from different people. And so, if you want to make a change, you need to be able to present them with your message, but, it's even more effective when it's done in sort of a coalition kind of way. So I think one thing we've done as a company is really brought together, partnering with competitors, partnering with industry folks to help lead a lot of these different charges. Look, politicians, they want wins. They are looking for ways to be able to showcase how great they are. And that's just what we've been able to do. So I think we've sort of carved out a niche for ourselves as folks who are providing really good market, insights, intelligence. And that's one of the areas where we've seen a lot of success. I mean, we are going to be the first company to deploy onsite water reuse systems into several new geographies where this has never been done. And it's just about, we see ourselves as taking the opposite of the Uber approach, which is to say Uber, their whole methodology was we just steamroll the regulators. We just build this groundswell of support where if they try to shut us down, we're going to come at them. We can't really do that. When you're dealing with something like water with such big public health implications, or the fact that we can't get a building will not get a permit from the city unless they approve of the system that we put into their projects. We work really closely with regulators. We work really closely with elected officials. That's just been a big part of what we do as a company. And, I'll tell you, years ago, I pitched some executives from Suez who after the meeting, they came up to me and they said, we knew that what you're doing right now was going to be a big thing one day. But for us as a company, it makes more sense to focus on that, $1 billion desal plant in Saudi Arabia than to do all the legwork that you're doing, going from city to city, county. But I think we're getting to the point now where this whole approach is starting to gain traction. And we've developed a playbook now that's being adopted by more cities, by more states, and soon, I think, by more countries.
Well, that's innovation in itself. I mean, because there is the, prevailing notion that, water tech needs to be more like Uber, just, show up and, develop that groundswell and then public policy changes. And that's part of the narrative that I've historically had. So flipping this around and, having a team or team member that has a skill set and understanding how public policy changes, and certainly having the patience to do that, coupled with, innovative technology and really smart marketing campaigns. It seems to be the trifecta here in terms of why you're successful and, the value of the brand that you have built and changing and pushing on the status quo ever so kindly, of course. Really interesting.
Yeah. And look, I think oftentimes there's this unfortunate dynamic set up where it's us versus the regulators. And, there's certainly times where we have disagreements with the regulators. I mean, look, I understand it. I think we have been doing things the same way for 250 years. I mean, going back to the sewers of London and Paris, I mean, frankly, if you want to go back to the ancient Romans, we haven't fundamentally changed how we do things. But as we know, a lot has changed in 250 years. But I understand I think the important thing is I understand where the regulators are coming from. So when they have opposition, it's not me saying, well, you're dumb and this is, you're stuck in the old ways. It's you need to understand where they're coming from and then kind of try to explain why this is not us versus you, but we need to work together. And I think, look, take San Francisco. San Francisco for me is the case study of a very forward thinking water utility. We are the sort of the ground zero for this whole onsite water reuse movement in the real estate world. And it didn't happen overnight. It happens going back 11 years, starting around 2012, when this whole framework started being developed by, Paul Aquillo at the SFPUC and a lot of other folks. I think you have there's definitely sort of different dynamics that you see, but we fundamentally are just of the approach that, the regulators are not our enemies. The regulators are trying to protect public health, but we do understand that they're not always going to understand why we're trying to push the boundaries of what they do. So it's finding that that dynamic.
Do you think, because essentially what you're doing here, from educating the real estate companies to the marketing, you're sort of you're driving a movement, if you will, on decentralized water reuse. And I think fundamentally, in the past, people have thought movements would be counter to governments or counter to federal government and regulators. But actually, you're involving all stakeholders across different levels, right? From the regulators to the utilities to the real estate companies, to bring everyone with you on why there needs to be a fundamental sort of change on how we treat grey water in commercial buildings.
Yeah, I think, look, a lot of marketing experts would probably think, that we're trying to reach too many people. I think usually you're trying to be pretty targeted in who you're trying to affect, who are the key stakeholders, because we see it as sort of there's a few circles here. Our key stakeholders are the folks, our core customers, the people who are signing checks to buy our systems and our services. So that's going to be real estate developers and owners. It's going to be large contractors, plumbing contractors, different folks in the real estate trades. But it's almost like a Venn diagram. Right next to them are the regulators, because we can't sell systems if a regulator in any given territory doesn't approve of what we're doing. If we put a system into a building and the regulator says, well, we don't allow for this, then that doesn't work either. And again, I always go back to my vantage point of being new to this industry. I think the reason why we're trying to speak to the general public as well is that, you stop the average person on the street, you ask them, what's the most exciting technology company? Apple, Microsoft, ChatGPT. There's a lot of different names that come. What's the most exciting EV company? Tesla, Rivian, Lucid. What's the most exciting solar company? Solar City, Sunrun. What's the most exciting water company? The average, I did this exercise with some investors and their answer was Dasani. I think that was a joke. But, I think the average individual isn't aware of the Xylems of the world or the Suez or all these companies, massive companies doing incredible things. And I think we see ourselves as being able to play that role, to sort of be the face of water innovation, because we are not selling to utilities. We are selling into projects and buildings where we are interacting with the general public in a way that maybe others aren't. And so I think that's why we're sort of biting off a lot and trying to reach a lot of different diverse audiences. But we have an incredible team that is able to kind of come up with marketing campaigns that are targeted at each of these different subsets.
It strikes me that you're really taking head on this whole issue of water being invisible. In a way, water infrastructure, it's invisible, and people just don't know how it works. I would say similar to where energy was, a couple of decades ago, where, where does energy come from? And, an outlet, that's it. And, where does water come from? The tap, that's interesting. You're really tackling a number of different things at the same time, increasing awareness in civil society, proactively and constructively engaging with the public sector, the regulators, and building some excitement around a brand in a very different way. And I'm compelled to say this before we run out of time. I love the little toilet in your background.
Yeah. Yeah, the golden the golden
What's the deal, Aaron?
Yeah, well, the golden toilet is actually a very common motif throughout Epic Cleantec. So, we built we're talking a lot about water, but we are sort of believers in this whole notion that there is no waste in wastewater, and so we are converting building wastewater, or I should say, we have the capability to convert building wastewater into both clean water that we can recycle for non-potable applications. We also produce high quality soil amendments, and that was kind of work from the Gates Foundation. Then we're also doing wastewater heat recovery, and actually capturing the energy, the embodied energy in all of this heated wastewater in these buildings and reusing it. It's on that second piece, on the soil piece. So we actually built a garden. We took over an old Honda dealership in downtown San Francisco. We built what we call our Epic Showcase Garden. And our first foray into golden toilets was we actually bought a bunch of toilets, made them gold, and then we used those as planters. We noticed that the whole golden toilet thing really just got people's attention. That was definitely the most photographed element of the Epic visit. So for Green Build, this conference I mentioned, so in addition to unveiling our system, in addition to introducing this beer, we actually built a 6.5 foot golden toilet that was structurally designed to be able to have people sit on it. And the sustainability team from Google actually was able to fit 6 people on our toilet, 4 on the main bowl, and then 2 on the tank. And then this toilet that you're seeing behind us was actually a 3D printed toilet from one of our summer interns. So he interned here, got into a great engineering school, and he made us this 3D printed toilet. But beyond the whimsy of it, I mean, I think a lot of things that we're trying to do is engage people and then have the conversation. I think, Tom, you mentioned at the outset the jokes in the sort of the whimsical title with the Gates story. And I think it's one of the occupational hazards of this work is that the water puns and the wastewater puns, like everyone just reverts to their inner middle schooler when they start talking about everything toilet and scatological. I've had like very serious meetings, structuring an agreement with Stanford where Stanford's lawyers, these very serious people, all of a sudden were dropping like the worst dad wastewater jokes you could ever imagine. But rather than trying to sort of shy away from that and say, oh, that's too silly and that's going to take away from the brand, we've actually kind of leaned into it. It's we studied all these other brands, Squatty Potty, PooPourri, all of these are Tushy. Tushy, just so Tushy, the bidet brand, during COVID, during the whole toilet paper scare, they did $1 million of sales consecutively every day for like 2 months. Wow. We see if people are going to have fun with it, it's in a way to engage them. Lean into it. We'll lean into that, we'll have that conversation. And then we go to the science, then we go to the engineering. We kind of have this little, this interesting thing we're always playing with to see how far can we take it without it going too far.
Well, I think it's the tone of voice is to have fun, right? It's essentially it's an engaging, entertainment, new, innovative brand, and you back it up with the science and the engineering afterwards. But actually, that front-facing, those campaigns you mentioned are really engaging to get people talking. And in terms of the golden toilet, I mean, they call it the royal throne, right? So why not? I think it's a kudos on going with that. It's certainly another talking point, but Aaron, really amazing to have you on the stream. Good to hear about your sort of entrepreneurial stories and really, as I mentioned, sort of leading a movement. I do think you guys are doing that on decentralized reuse, and as you mentioned, San Francisco will be a beacon of how other cities will look to how that is done and really rethinking wastewater treatment. So, yeah, thanks for joining us. We are 100% going to have you back on with your dad for part 2.
Give him a heads up.
I will.
And yeah, great to have you, and keep in touch. Will, any sort of final remarks on your side?
I am so struck by the innovation that has nothing to do with the technology. And look, your technology works. It's great. But my big takeaway is that you really thought about a go-to-market strategy in a very, very creative way, and building a brand in a very different way. and getting sticky, if you will, with the layperson and other stakeholders. So yeah, innovation beyond tech, for me is the big aha in this conversation.
Well, as someone, I still consider myself relatively new to the industry. So, to get that type of feedback from you both, who I consider, titans in the water industry, major voices, it means a lot. And, I think it's confirmation that we're doing something right. So I really appreciate you having me on, and I'll make sure to alert my pops to get ready for his podcast debut.
We will just tell him beforehand he's not allowed to call you sweetie on the show. Okay, we'll give him a heads up. No, I'm joking. Of course, he can call you what he likes on the stream, but.
I will say I'm really struck by the family values, the culture 100%, that you have also. I mean, it's impressive, Aaron. So we're going to have your dad on board.
Okay, I'll let him know.
Sounds good.
All right, cheers, Aaron.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you both.
Take care of yourself.
Cheers.